Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. I walked out of the attorney's office with my heart racing and a smile I couldn't hide, the kind that comes when fate finally turns in your favor. My grandfather, a man of few words but deep loyalty, had left me not only a beautiful townhouse in Manhattan, but also a beach house in Florida, bathed in golden sunsets and silence. For years we had struggled to stay afloat, but now the storm was over. I clutched the documents to my chest as if they were a shield against everything that had once made me feel small. At last I felt seen, chosen, and ready to share this moment with the person I trusted most. On the subway ride home, I imagined Michael's face when I told him. His smile, that boyish glint in his eyes that used to make my heart skip. We had always talked about a fresh start, and now it was real. No more nights worrying about rent, no more pushing dreams aside to pay bills. I pictured us walking hand in hand through our beach house, planning our future, maybe even starting that small business he once mentioned. It would be our turning point. I could already hear him saying, "We made it, baby." I had no idea I was walking straight into a lie. 15 years of marriage had left their mark. Some days warm, some cold, but through it all I believed we were a team. We had survived miscarriages, job losses, illnesses, and holidays with his impossible family. I always told myself that love was about staying, not running when things got hard. Michael wasn't perfect. He could be distant, forgetful, but I knew his heart, or thought I did. We had history, we had memories, we had plans. I carried the weight of our shared life proudly like a badge. I never once doubted he would carry it too. Linda, my mother-in-law, had never hidden her disdain for me. From the moment Michael introduced us, she sized me up like something she'd scrape off her designer shoe. She'd smile in front of others, but in private, her words cut deep, little jabs disguised as advice. "You're not really his type," she once whispered at our engagement dinner. I tried, God knows I tried. I brought her soup when she was sick, remembered her birthday, even defended her when Michael lost patience. But it was never enough. To her, I was just the woman who stole her son. When I got home that afternoon, the hallway felt off, silent still. I reached for the doorknob and realized it wasn't fully shut, just barely resting against the frame. My first instinct was worry. Had Michael been in a rush? Was something wrong? I pushed it gently, careful not to make a sound, a strange tension tightening in my chest. The lights were on and the air felt too still. I stepped inside, holding my breath, planning to surprise him with the news. But the surprise waiting for me was far from joyful. It would change everything I thought I knew. From the living room I heard voices, Michael's and Linda's, both speaking low, sharp, too focused to notice my quiet steps. I stopped mid-stride, frozen, confusion swirling with a creeping sense of dread. They never talked like that when I was home. I should have made my presence known, but something told me not to. I leaned against the hallway wall, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear their words at first. Then Linda's voice cut through the air, clear and cruel. I wasn't supposed to hear what I heard, but I did. And it shattered me. "When that fool signs everything over to you, we'll kick her out," Linda said, her voice laced with venom and certainty. My knees almost gave out. She wasn't talking about anyone else. She was talking about me. I was the fool. My hand gripped the wall for balance as a million thoughts collided in my head. I had just come back from giving Michael the world, and here they were, plotting to erase me from it. Every word out of her mouth felt like a knife, deliberate and cold. And Michael, he didn't stop her. He didn't say a thing. Instead, he laughed, a soft, smug sound I barely recognized. "Relax, Mom. She'll put it all in my name. She trusts me blindly," he said so casually it made me sick. My world tilted. I had spent years believing our love was real, and now I realized I was nothing more than a pawn in his plan. I had imagined a future where we finally breathed easy together, but he had imagined a future without me. And the worst part? He was right. I did trust him. Completely. Until that moment, I would have signed anything. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. The air felt thick, like I was underwater, drowning in disbelief. Was this real? Had I misunderstood? No, their voices were clear, their intent even clearer. Everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, it was just fuel for their betrayal. I didn't know whether to scream or collapse. Instead, I stood there, numb, as if my body had shut down to protect me from the heartbreak exploding inside my chest. The man I loved was preparing to destroy me, and doing it with a smile. And after that, file for divorce and we'll keep it all. At least she'll have been useful, Linda added, followed by a dry laugh that made my skin crawl. That was it. That was the plan. Milk me for everything I had, then toss me aside like trash. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts in their voices, just calculation and greed. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. Not yet. I needed to hear every word, every single one, because this wasn't just betrayal. It was war. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop the scream clawing its way up my throat. My pulse pounded in my ears, my chest ached, but I stayed frozen in place. They thought I was clueless. They thought I would hand over everything and disappear quietly. But they didn't know what they had awakened inside me. I swallowed my sobs, clenched my fists, and backed away from the hallway like a shadow. My world had just crumbled, but so had my illusion. And from those ruins, something colder, sharper, and far stronger was starting to rise. As I stood in the quiet hallway, hidden from their voices and venom, my mind raced through everything I had done for that family. I remembered quitting my job when Michael said we needed stability at home, and I believed him. I remembered taking care of Linda after her hip surgery, sleeping on her couch for weeks, feeding her, bathing her when she couldn't move. I remembered defending them when people warned me they were selfish. All those holidays I cooked alone while they criticized the decorations I put up with love. I gave them my time, my energy, my loyalty. And now they were planning to throw me away like a stranger who had overstayed her welcome. I had built my life around Michael. His dreams, his needs, his comfort. Every decision I made was filtered through the question, will this help us? I stood by him when he lost his job. I worked extra hours when he wanted to start a new project. I cheered him on when no one else did. I never thought I was sacrificing myself. I thought I was investing in something real. I believed we were a team, equal partners navigating life together. But I was wrong. I wasn't his partner. I was just his backup plan, his safety net, his useful fool. The rage didn't come all at once. It simmered slow and dangerous, like a fuse burning towards something explosive. I wanted to barge into the living room and scream, to throw the documents in their faces and ask them how they could be so heartless. But I didn't. I stood in the shadows and listened because I knew this wasn't over. The pain was unbearable, yes, but now I had information. And information was power. If they wanted to play a game, they had no idea I could play it better. I just needed to stay silent. For now. Don't take too long, son. That inheritance is the chance of your life, Linda said, her tone urgent, like they were running out of time. Michael replied something I couldn't hear, but I caught enough to know they had already discussed legal strategies, ways to move the assets quietly. They had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. I realized that every kind word, every warm look from Michael recently had been rehearsed. Linda's sudden politeness last week? Part of the act. My whole world wasn't just breaking. It had been built on lies. Carefully constructed, deliberately cruel lies. She'll think it's better legally if it's in my name. She won't even hesitate, Michael said, and I felt my stomach twist. He knew me too well, knew I'd want to protect him, to trust him, to believe we were in it together. That was his weapon. He used my love against me, twisted it into something that served only him. And worst of all, I had handed him the knife, smiling, saying, I trust you, while he calculated how deep he could stab. That wasn't love. That was betrayal wearing the perfect disguise. and I had fallen for it completely. Every sweet word, every moment of affection, now played back in my mind like a horror film. The dinner date he surprised me with last month, the one I thought was for love, was part of the trap. The sudden interest in helping with finances wasn't care. It was preparation. Even the way he held me at night had changed, and I hadn't noticed. He was acting, rehearsing for a scene in which I'd be the fool and he'd be the winner. I had loved a stranger in my own home, and that realization burned deeper than anything they said. It wasn't just Michael. Linda was just as involved, maybe more. And that's what cut me open the most. I had tried so hard to earn her love, to be a good daughter-in-law, to prove that I was worthy. I had forgiven her endless slights, swallowed my pride more times than I could count. I thought one day she'd soften. One day she'd see how much I loved her son, how much I sacrificed. But no, I was never family to her. Just an obstacle in the way of the life she thought Michael deserved, without me in it. I stood there shaking with two options in front of me. Confront them now and watch the whole thing explode. Or walk away quietly, say nothing and start playing my own game. One was fast and loud, the other cold and calculated. My heart screamed for justice, for fire and fury. But my mind whispered, wait. Gather proof. Take everything. I had spent years reacting. Now it was time to plan. So I took one last breath, turned around slowly, and walked back out the door, unseen, unheard, and no longer unaware. I didn't cry in the elevator. I didn't cry on the street. I walked like a ghost, invisible to the world, but burning inside with a storm no one could see. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought I would walk right into their trap and never notice. But silence would be my shield. I wouldn't confront them. I'd watch, learn, and strike when it hurt the most. I would smile. I would kiss him. I would play the role of the naive wife. Until it was time to reveal who I really was. That night, I lay awake in bed beside the man plotting to erase me, my back turned to him, my eyes wide open. I stared into the dark, the silence around me heavy with betrayal and strategy. He slept peacefully, unaware that I knew everything. I could hear his breathing, steady, calm. How dare he sleep like that while my soul was on fire? I didn't shed a single tear. My body was stiff, my heart racing, my mind already working. I wasn't broken. I wasn't done. I was preparing for justice, for revenge, for freedom. By sunrise, the tears had dried, and all that remained was cold determination. I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper, mapping out everything I needed to do to protect myself. No more reacting emotionally. This time, every move would be deliberate, precise, and quiet. I listed names of attorneys, financial advisors, and friends I could trust. I wouldn't let Michael or Linda see me coming. They were counting on my silence, my ignorance. But they had no idea I was already 5 steps ahead. That morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer I remembered from years ago. Sharp, discreet, and fiercely protective of women like me. I told him everything I had overheard, every word etched in my memory like a scar. He listened without interruption, his eyes narrowing with every new detail. "You're not crazy," he said. "You're in danger, and you're smart to come now." He explained my rights, what I could do to secure the assets, and most importantly, how to do it without raising suspicion. Finally, someone saw what I saw. I wasn't alone anymore. The lawyer's words were a lifeline. Since the inheritance is solely in your name, you can register and protect it without your husband's involvement. I almost cried from relief. All the power they thought they had could vanish with a single document if I acted fast. He outlined a plan. Move quickly, file the property under my name, and avoid any joint filings or shared bank use. Michael would never know until it was too late. I walked out of that office feeling something I hadn't felt in days: control. The house would be mine. Everything would. The next day, I returned to the attorney's office with all the necessary documents. My hands shook slightly as I signed each form, but I didn't stop. With every stroke of the pen, I took back a piece of my life. It felt surreal, almost like I was writing the ending of one story and the beginning of another. The beach house in Florida was now protected. The Manhattan townhouse was officially and legally mine alone. I walked out onto the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and smiled for the first time in days. I had made my first move. When I got home, Michael was on the couch, watching TV like nothing had changed. I forced myself to smile, kissed him on the cheek, and asked what he wanted for dinner. "Surprise me," he said, and I nearly laughed. Oh, I would. I made his favorite pasta, poured him a glass of wine, and pretended to be the same wife he thought he had fooled. Every gesture was deliberate, every word controlled. He believed I was still in the dark. He had no idea he was dining with the woman who had just ruined his plan. After dinner, I sat beside him and placed my hand over his. "Honey," I said with practiced sweetness, "Grandpa left me 2 properties, a townhouse here and a beach house in Florida." His eyes widened just slightly, just enough for me to catch the flicker of greed behind the surprise. "Wow, babe, that's amazing," he said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, all smiles, all warmth, like I hadn't just turned his perfect scheme into dust. "It still doesn't feel real," I whispered. And he nodded, clueless that I was telling the truth, but not in the way he thought. "That's wonderful. We should put them under both our names," he said casually, almost too casually. I smiled and nodded slowly, as if the idea hadn't already been burned to ash by my lawyer's pen. "Of course," I replied. "Once everything is finalized, we'll handle the paperwork together." He leaned over and kissed my forehead like a man who thought he was winning. Inside, I was steel. I had already locked him out legally, but I needed him to keep playing his part. The more confident he felt, the more careless he'd become. Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly: soft, loving, hopeful. I asked Michael if he wanted to visit the Florida property, discuss potential renovations, even joked about buying matching beach chairs. He laughed, charmed, already dreaming about what wasn't his. I pretended to be swept up in the fantasy while secretly checking on the final title transfers and making sure nothing was traceable to him. He thought he was conning me, but every word he spoke was another thread tightening the noose he didn't even know existed. And I was smiling while I tied the knot. While he bragged to his friends about how things were finally looking up, I was meeting with my accountant to separate every remaining joint asset. I opened new accounts, set up backups, and slowly started shifting funds, all without a trace. Michael was too distracted by the fake future he thought he'd secured to notice. Every smile he gave me felt like a victory now because I knew more than he did. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading, and he was walking straight into a future I had designed for me, not for us. Just to be sure, I began recording their conversations whenever they spoke at home. I left my phone on the shelf, screen off, mic on. I didn't care if it was unethical. This wasn't about fairness anymore, it was about survival. I needed more than memory and emotion, I needed evidence. And it didn't take long. They spoke freely, always assuming I was too stupid to catch on. Every scheme, every insult, every detail was now on file. The betrayal that once broke me was now being documented, one cold, damning sentence at a time. One afternoon, as I folded laundry in the hallway, my phone hidden nearby recorded another bombshell. "Once I get the deeds, I'll throw her out without hesitation," Michael said casually, like he was talking about taking out the trash. Linda murmured something in agreement, and they both laughed, relaxed, smug, unaware that every syllable was sealing their fate. I stopped folding, my hands frozen midair, the white cotton shirt suddenly too heavy to hold. He didn't even plan to wait. No warnings, no hesitation, just betrayal served cold. That's when I realized he didn't love me at all. He never did. Hearing those words broke something final in me. Until then, some small part of me still held on to hope that maybe he was confused, manipulated, not fully aware of what he was doing. But no, he was sharp, deliberate, and cruel. He knew what I had given up. He knew how much I loved him. And still he planned to discard me like I was nothing. It hurt deeper than any fight we'd ever had. But strangely, it also gave me clarity. I wasn't fighting for a marriage anymore. I was fighting to reclaim my worth. A few days later, Linda showed up unannounced, thinking I was out. I had left my car parked blocks away on purpose just to test them. From the hallway, I watched her walk in confidently, cell phone already to her ear. "Yes, it's a 2-bedroom townhouse, great location," she said, her voice full of excitement. My jaw clenched as she began listing square footage, finishes, nearby shops, describing my inheritance like it was her property. I hit record again. She wasn't just conspiring. She was already trying to sell it. I didn't interrupt her. I just listened and documented everything. I recorded her entire conversation with the realtor, every arrogant lie she told. "Yes, my son and I are handling the paperwork," she said, as if I didn't exist. The audacity was almost laughable. She walked through my living room, took photos, opened cabinets, commented on what she'd remodel. I stayed out of sight, shaking with rage but focused. Every word was another nail in their coffin. When she left, I emailed the recording to myself, labeled it proof_3. I didn't just want justice anymore. I wanted to bury every trace of their manipulation with facts. Later that week, while checking old receipts and bank statements, I noticed small transfers, too small to trigger alerts but consistent. I followed the trail and found something I hadn't expected. Michael had opened a secret account under Linda's name months ago. He was slowly draining our shared funds, moving them out like a thief preparing his escape. He thought he was clever. He thought I wouldn't notice. But I printed everything, every statement, every transaction. What once made me cry now made me calm. Their arrogance was my greatest weapon. They weren't careful. I was. With each passing day, Michael's fake warmth started to falter. I could see the cracks, how he watched me out of the corner of his eye, how he got tense whenever I mentioned money or paperwork. He sensed something, but he couldn't name it. I kept my voice soft, my face pleasant, my lies smoother than his. But I noticed the way he checked my phone when I wasn't looking. The way he asked strange questions in roundabout ways. He felt the shift but didn't understand it. That was the beauty of it. He had no idea the trap was already closed. I started pulling away just enough to make him wonder. I stopped initiating conversations, avoided eye contact, let silence linger longer than usual. When he asked what was wrong, I'd smile and say, "Nothing at all." I made fewer meals, left earlier for errands, stayed out longer. He noticed. I could feel his growing discomfort, but I gave him no clues. He thought I was just tired, maybe hormonal, maybe stressed. Let him guess. Let him worry. The more he stumbled trying to read me, the clearer it became. I was no longer his to manipulate. On his birthday, I handed him a small, wrapped envelope instead of the usual gift. He smiled like a child, expecting something sentimental or expensive. Instead, he found a USB drive and a printed note that read, "Press play before you say a word." His face twisted with confusion as he plugged it into his laptop. Within seconds, Linda's voice filled the room, followed by his own. Every lie, every plan, every cruel intention. I sat on the couch, silent, watching him unravel. His eyes darted to me, searching for the version of me he used to fool. She was gone. "What is this?" he asked, his voice breaking halfway through the sentence. "Proof," I said, my voice steady, my eyes locked on his. "Proof of who you really are." He stammered, tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away slowly. He didn't speak right away. He couldn't. His face paled. His mouth opened and closed like he had forgotten how words worked. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, only just realizing there was no ground behind him. And I had never felt more powerful. I stood up, still calm, and began to speak. Not yelling, not crying, just stating facts. I told him every word I had heard, every conversation I had recorded, every detail he thought was secret. I laid out his betrayal like a criminal case, complete with dates, amounts, and intentions. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. He just sat there shrinking. "You were planning to throw me out of my own home," I said, my voice low but sharp. "But it's not your home anymore. It never was. And neither am I." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I hadn't expected Linda to walk in while Michael was still frozen, but the timing was perfect. She saw his expression and immediately asked, "What happened?" He couldn't answer. So I did. I played the recording again, her voice filling the room with venom and arrogance, and watched as her face drained of color. "That's edited," she said weakly, but her voice cracked. Michael didn't defend her. He just stared at the floor, defeated. In that moment, the queen of manipulation realized her kingdom was burning, and I was holding the match. I stood taller than ever as I handed them both an envelope with official eviction notices, stamped and signed. "You have 48 hours to leave my apartment," I said coldly, no trace of pity in my voice. Linda opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Michael reached for the papers with shaking hands. "This can't be legal," he muttered, but I was already walking away. It was legal. It was done. I didn't need their approval. I had the law, the evidence, and the truth on my side. Michael tried to flip the script the moment reality set in. He called me ungrateful, said I was turning into someone else, accused me of being heartless. But I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, his words bounced off me like rain on stone. He wasn't angry because he loved me, he was angry because he lost control. He screamed, begged, threatened, then cried. I said nothing. I just watched. Because when someone shows you their true self, the best thing you can do is finally believe them. With my attorney's help, I filed for divorce and reported every financial manipulation, every document transfer attempt, every illegal transaction. Linda tried to backpedal, said she had no idea Michael was doing anything shady, but the recordings told a different story. We submitted everything to the court, dates, statements, audio, texts. It wasn't just betrayal, it was attempted fraud. What they thought was a harmless scam now had legal consequences. I wasn't just fighting for freedom anymore. I was making sure no one else would suffer from their schemes again. And this time I had the law behind me. At first, I thought I'd face it all alone, but news travels fast, and people I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out. Friends who had once drifted away because they didn't know what I was living through came back with open arms. Some had seen glimpses of Michael's arrogance. Others had stories of Linda's cruelty. I realized how much I had hidden over the years just to keep the peace. Now the truth was out and people saw me, really saw me. For the first time in a long while, I felt supported, not silenced. The divorce was long, brutal, and filled with accusations that made me sick. Michael tried everything: emotional manipulation, lies, even fake witnesses. Linda sat stone-faced in court, pretending to be a victim. I faced every hearing with calm dignity, never stooping to their level. Some days I left the courtroom shaking, other days I felt invincible. It was exhausting, but every lie they told only strengthened my case. I kept reminding myself, I already survived the worst. Now I was just clearing the wreckage. When the recordings were finally played in court, the silence was deafening. Even the judge leaned forward, visibly stunned by the cold, calculated nature of their conversations. There were no more excuses to hide behind. No way to twist the truth into something prettier. Michael sat with his head down, no longer smug. Linda refused to meet my eyes. I watched them both shrink beneath the weight of their own words. The courtroom became a mirror, and they were forced to face what they really were. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt closure. Michael didn't go to jail, though part of me wished he had. But the court stripped him of any claim to the properties or joint assets. He walked away with nothing but shame and a legal record of his attempt to defraud his own wife. Linda was banned from any financial involvement in our divorce. The sentence wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. About proving that manipulation has consequences, that betrayal comes with a cost. I walked out of that courtroom not just free but clean. They couldn't take anything from me ever again. After the trial, Linda vanished from our lives. Rumor had it she tried to move in with a cousin, but even family turned their backs. She lost the respect she had once demanded and the social circle she thought would protect her. Her bitterness, once hidden behind forced smiles, now consumed her. People remembered what they heard on those recordings, how cold, how cruel, how proud she was of the plan. No one wanted to be near her anymore. In the end, the woman who called me useless was left completely alone, and I didn't lose a second of sleep over it. Months later, I sold the beach house. Not because I didn't love it, but because I wanted to start something that was mine. I used part of the money to open a small design studio in Manhattan, something I had always dreamed of but never dared to pursue. The rest I invested wisely with advisors I trusted. I moved into the townhouse, redecorated every room, removed every trace of the life I once shared with Michael. I filled the space with light, color, and peace. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was a whole new book with my name on the cover. Owning the studio felt like waking up from a long, restless sleep. For years, I had molded myself into the shape of someone else's expectations. Michael's, Linda's, even society's. But now, every decision, every piece of fabric, every client I chose reflected me. I dressed how I wanted, spoke with clarity, and walked into rooms without shrinking. I was no longer someone's wife. I was myself, fully and unapologetically. The fear that once followed me like a shadow had turned into strength. I didn't just survive. I came back to life. There were days when a scent, a word, or a familiar corner of the city would pull me back to the betrayal. Some wounds leave invisible scars, and though time softened the pain, it never erased it completely. I'd remember the girl I was, the one who believed love alone would be enough, and I'd feel a sharp ache of loss. Not just of Michael, but of my own innocence. I missed her sometimes, even as I grew stronger. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a quiet daily decision to keep walking even when it hurt. If that chapter taught me anything, it was this: love without respect is hollow, and loyalty to the wrong person is self-destruction. I had confused endurance with strength, silence with wisdom. Now I knew better. Love should never cost you your voice, your dreams, or your identity. The next time I loved, it would be different. Not because I was bitter, but because I was finally whole. You don't owe anyone your life just because you once shared it with them. It was a cold Thursday afternoon when I saw him, Michael, standing alone at a street corner, older, thinner, eyes sunken and lost. He looked at me for just a second, unsure if he should speak, but I didn't stop walking. His clothes were wrinkled, his expression blank, like someone who had nothing left to lie about. In that moment, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet recognition that I was looking at a man destroyed by his own choices. I passed him without a word. Closure didn't need conversation. It needed distance. While he faded into the crowd, I walked forward with my shoulders back and my head high. I didn't need to prove anything to him or to anyone else. My dignity had remained intact, even when everything else had fallen apart. I had rebuilt my life from ashes without turning cold or bitter. That was my real victory. In a world where people often break and stay broken, I had chosen to heal. And nothing could take that from me. One night, sitting by the ocean, I whispered something I never thought I'd say. I forgive you. Not for his sake, but for mine. Carrying the weight of that betrayal was like dragging chains across every new joy I tried to feel. I didn't excuse him. I didn't forget. But I no longer let his shadow follow me into the light I had built. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I gave him. It was the freedom I gave myself. And with that, the last thread between us finally snapped. My story wasn't just mine anymore. I started speaking at women's events, sharing what I had survived. How easily love can turn into a trap when you're taught to give without limit. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told the truth raw and unpolished. And each time someone came up afterward in tears saying, "I thought I was the only one." That was my real inheritance. Not the house, not the money, but the strength to turn pain into purpose. To make sure no other woman would feel as alone as I once did. With time I traveled, studied new design techniques abroad, met people with open hearts and honest smiles. I rebuilt friendships I had lost and discovered places I never thought I'd see. I no longer waited for life to happen. I created it piece by piece. My mornings were filled with sunlight and music, my nights with peace and laughter. I stopped looking over my shoulder. The past stayed behind me. The future was finally mine to shape, and for the first time I wanted it all. And then when I wasn't looking, love found me again. Not the kind that sweeps you off your feet, but the kind that stands beside you. Steady, kind, unafraid of your past. He listened more than he spoke, asked instead of assumed, supported without controlling. I never had to explain my silence or dim my light to keep his. He didn't want to own me. He wanted to walk with me. I realized then, love isn't supposed to feel like sacrifice. It's supposed to feel like coming home to yourself and someone smiling as you arrive. Years later, Michael sent an email asking to meet. Out of curiosity, not emotion, I agreed. He looked older, worn down by time and regret. He apologized, offered explanations, blamed the person he used to be. I listened quietly, then looked him in the eyes and said, "Thank you." He blinked, confused. "For teaching me never to trust blindly," I added. There was nothing more to say. I stood up, shook his hand and walked out, free, whole, and finally untouched by his presence. I never saw Linda again after the trial, but word eventually reached me. She had become a recluse, bitter and angry, shunned by the very social circles she once tried so hard to impress. No one wanted to associate with a woman exposed for manipulating her own family. She lived alone in a small apartment far from the city she used to rule. Whatever pride she once had curdled into loneliness. And perhaps that was the most fitting end. Not loud or dramatic, but forgotten. She taught me cruelty by example. Life taught her consequences. Took time, but eventually I stopped looking back. The woman I once was, trusting, eager to please, quietly resilient, had evolved. I no longer lived in reaction to what they did to me. I lived in response to who I had become. I had lost everything I thought defined me and, in return, gained everything that truly mattered. The cycle of pain had ended, not in revenge, but in growth. The circle was closed. And standing inside it was a woman who had been broken and rebuilt herself better. Now, every night when I lie down to sleep, I do so in silence. Not the heavy kind filled with secrets and dread, but the light kind that comes after a storm has passed. I don't check messages hoping someone changed. I don't shrink myself to make anyone comfortable. My home is mine. My peace is mine. I finally learned that love, when real, brings peace, not fear. And for the first time in years, I sleep deeply, knowing I never betrayed myself again. I was betrayed, humiliated, and nearly erased, but I rose. I didn't just survive them. I outgrew them. They tried to take everything from me, but in the end they handed me something far greater. Clarity, strength, and the chance to build a life on truth. I no longer live in someone else's shadow. My story is no longer about what they did. It's about what I did next. And that is my greatest victory. Eventually, I turned my story into a book. Not a revenge tale, but a roadmap for women learning to trust themselves again. I wrote every chapter late at night, reliving the pain but also the power. The day it was published, I cried, not because of the past, but because I had taken back the narrative. It hit bestseller lists within weeks. I didn't care about the fame. What mattered was that my voice, once silenced, now echoed louder than ever. The truth was mine, and now it helped others find theirs. Emails and letters began pouring in. Women from every background thanking me for telling the story they hadn't yet found words for. "You gave me the courage to leave," one wrote. "I'm not ashamed anymore," said another. Their stories weren't copies of mine. They were their own tragedies, their own rebirths. But pain speaks a universal language, and healing does too. In lifting myself, I'd unknowingly helped others stand. And there's no legacy more powerful than that. The man in my life now doesn't need to fix me or save me. He listens, stands beside me, respects my past without being threatened by it. We laugh more than we talk about pain. We dream instead of recovering. He knows I built myself without him, and that's exactly why he cherishes me. I don't need him to complete me, but I choose him every day from a place of freedom, not fear. And that is the love I never thought I'd find. Years later, I had a daughter, not by accident but by decision. I look at her and see the strength of every choice I fought to make. She'll grow up knowing that love should never hurt, and that silence is not strength if it costs you your soul. I'll teach her that her voice is her birthright, her boundaries sacred. She won't inherit my pain, she'll inherit my power. And through her the story continues, but rewritten with light. Every chapter of my life, even the darkest ones, brought me here. And if I had to live it all again to reach this peace, I would. Not because they deserved a second chance, but because I did. This was never just a story of betrayal. It was a story of awakening, of rebirth, of a woman who refused to disappear. And if you're reading this doubting your strength, I'll tell you this. You don't need to be rescued. You just need to remember who you are.